Hello everyone, and welcome to the Demonstrating Implementation Excellence stream of the SNOMED CT Expo 2024. And thank you for FAST for sponsoring this stream. My name is Elaine Waller and I'm a Senior Terminologist at SNOMED International, and I'll be moderating today's sessions. All questions will be answered at the conclusion of the presentation. For online attendees, please use the Q&A button to type your questions to the presenter. On-site attendees, please use the microphone provided after you've raised your hand. I'm now pleased to introduce Diego Kaminker from HL7 International, who will be presenting Global Trends in FHIR Adoption. Diego, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Let me see if we can go forward. Yes, that's my presentation. So let's go to our global reach, global technologies, global international guides, and regional implementations. This is not exhaustive. We have only what we know, and I can show you in half an hour only what I can show you. So there are much more countries, much more implementations. They cannot fit this format. We can do a 1-week seminar to show everything that is happening all around the world. This is our mission, and these are our affiliates and partners. And this is the real map. Everywhere where FHIR is being used or one of the standards is being used. So much more than what we can see in our affiliate and network map. This is the global FHIR toolbox. This serves any implementations anywhere in the world. The FHIR core spec with the methods, the resources, and the syntax. This is where SNOMED codes travel. So when you create a SNOMED code, it needs to go somewhere inside of an artifact. And this is where SNOMED code travels, inside of the FHIR resources, along with the identification of the entities. So when you have entities identified and concepts identified, you have semantic interoperability. Then we have the FHIR implementation guides, FHIR profiles for a country or a domain, specific for Korea, specific for the Netherlands, specific for oncology. That's the FHIR implementation guides. The tooling to create FHIR implementation guides is global for everyone. FHIR is global for everyone. Smart on FHIR about security and how to implement applications that launch inside the EHR and can be replaced. That's also global. CDS hooks to call clinical decision support, any clinical decision support and get results, also global for any market. Bulk data access, obtaining big data chunks, many million records for any EHR, that's also global for anyone. And finally, clinical quality language to calculate measures, numerator and denominator in the EHR using a standard language, also global for any market, domain, or country. So FHIR is the global spec, equal for all over the world. The last version was release 5. That's where you can find it. Most implementations use FHIR release 4, which was created in 2018. So FHIR defines an API platform for exchange, the transport, the security, the syntax, mostly JSON, the structure based on the data types and FHIR resources, the methods, and our own terminology. But when we need clinical terminology, we recommend using SNOMED, LOINC, or others. So FHIR is the web for healthcare. Then you need profiles on top of FHIR, which resource you will use, which paradigms you will use for exchange, which version of FHIR you will be using, which search parameters you will use for searching resources, which operations you have defined, which are outside of the regular RESTful operations, and whether you support resource versioning or not. And also for each kind of resource, whether they are mandatory or unsupported elements, if you have specific values for element repetitions, any extensions when the standard is not enough, you want to create your own extensions for your own use case or realm, terminology for coded elements, and this is where SNOMED is defined, is used. So for this element, you want to use SNOMED or ICD-10. And finally, must support elements, which are things that are not mandatory or optional, or something in between. And also which other technologies you use in your profile, in your implementation guide. So we provide the tools and processes to create these profiles and adapt them for each realm, domain, use case, or project. Why do we need implementation guides? Because we need to adapt the standard to our own domain and use cases. An example, you have seen this all over the place, Netherlands, Korea, US, Canada. The definition of the concepts, it's one thing, it's generic, it's conceptual, and defines also a terminology, but the actual implementation is a FHIR profile. It's an actual definition of how the bytes will look like, what a specific JSON we need to exchange and when. So FHIR gives us the generic platform, the definition of the API, but you need to adapt it to your own use case and country. An example can be FHIR patient and US core patient. I will not go there, but if you can do it later, you will see the difference. More mandatory elements, the concepts are well defined with a specific terminology. The elements are not optional. Next, FHIR Global AGs, International Patient Summary, the patient current summary and valid across borders. Borders doesn't need to be national borders. It can be a provincial border, it can be a street, across the street border, any border. So it's valid on any border. International patient access is kind of the international patient summary, but instead of being a document, it's granular access to patient common data. I want only the glucose values. I want only the allergies. So I can use the definitions in the international patient access adapted to my country to access those values. PAHO-ESAVI, Pan American Report of Immunization-Related Adverse Events, WHO SMART guidelines, very complex guidelines for implementing what the World Health Organization thinks is appropriate for specific use cases. So how do we treat HIV? How do we do prenatal care? That is created to help the caregivers to know what to do next, depending on the conditions and observations of the current patient. So those are the WHO SMART guidelines. Before, they were paper-based. Now they are trying to do it computable. So whenever you have a patient in front, you know what to do based on the context. And finally, the LACPAS based on IPS created by BID and Rexel. It's an immunization record or summary. They are doing a connected on these 2 days, exactly on this with 18 countries. So this is IPS, brief summary for a patient as a document. And this is the WHO SMART guidelines. So the first level is the paper. They went all down to level 4 to do it computable. So instead of having a paper that will tell you what to do, you have a set of rules created and represented by patient resources, by FHIR resources, sorry. Regional FHIR implementation status reports on the continents we know of. I don't have anything from Antarctica. So let's begin with Asia. Taiwan has created its core IG. This is something that you have been hearing a lot, a core IG, the basis for exchange in the country. They are doing the infectious disease report and PHR from EHR on FHIR. Japan also created their own core IG, divided in 4 sections: administration, medication, and diagnostic and clinical, with all those resources. I will not read them, but you can go to the FHIR core, and if you know Japanese, you can read what it is about. I couldn't. This is about Korea, and I will not go a lot deeper on this. The main thing I would like to be bold on is this diagram. They are trying to create shared workflows. This is something I haven't seen in the other core IGs. How to improve clinical workflow using FHIR as exchange. So what can we improve? What flows are creating burden on our clinicians, and how can we improve them? India has the biggest project in the world called ABDM, 670 million patients registered so far. That's the page for the project. It's document-based, but they are also using SNOMED CT for some of the coded elements. And there is an implementation guide. The second is Singapore. I could not find the implementation guide for FHIR, but it's based on prevention instead of actual clinical care. So it's an app for the citizens to handle their own prevention. Indonesia runs the second bigger project in the world, mainly aimed for patient access to their own data. I think they presented today. The project is called Satu Sehat and is FHIR based. More than 200 million patients registered and using the app. You can see the app below, very small. If you have very good eyes, you can see that they have an app similar to Apple Health or Samsung Health with the patient data. Malaysia has something along the same rules with an implementation guide called Malaysia Core, and those are all the items that they are exchanging. Let's go to the USA. Most work in the USA is based on the accelerators. I will briefly tell you what the accelerators are and which is their goal. The Argonaut project has created all the basic tools we use, all the CDS hooks, the bulk FHIR, smart on FHIR, those were created by the Argonaut project. And also US Core. So when they begin discussing how to exchange data in America, they created CDI and they created US Core to represent CDI for patient access. All the other things came later. Da Vinci is about payer to provider and payer to payer exchange. Gravity project is about social determinants of health. Karen is about payer to patient information, what I have been paying for you. Helios is about public health and exchange of data for public health and between public health and providers. Codex is about oncology, genomics, and cardiology clinical domains. FAST is about how to implement FHIR at scale with a lot of networks of networks, how to handle automatic identification of the systems and logging and security. And finally, Vulkan is for research. Real world data coming from the EHRs to research, how to create OMOP from FHIR data, that kind of stuff, and also clinical trials. In one slide, you learn all the accelerator work. And mainly in the US, a lot of regulations using these specs on FHIR that we have created, mandating their use in the next 2 years and in the past 2 years too. So patient access is mandatory from 2022. Bulk FHIR is also mandatory from 2022, and all of them will or are being to be mandatory in the next years. Canadian, we saw a presentation today, very nice. I will skip it, but mostly you will have a pan-Canadian patient summary and pan-Canadian PSCA based on IPS. And that's main part of the work, which is not in Ontario, which is a specific province. But for all the pan-Canadian work, you will maybe look at the pan-Canadian patient summary. In Latin America, Chile has a law mandating the sharing of EHRs. They have IPS Chile, Gravity for Chile, and Core Chile. Argentina has the FHIR as the backbone of the shared digital network. We use FHIR MPI, IPS, and FHIR for e-prescription. Brazil is advancing on creating their own FHIR Brazilian Core and IPS adoption. Colombia is also about to create their own implementation guides for FHIR in various scenarios. In Africa, 1 year ago, the CDC of Africa defined in regulation that any exchange in the future will be based on FHIR. So those are the new IGs I've been seeing in the last months that are emerging, mostly about HIV treatment and care. Let's talk about Europe. Some European projects. EHDS is not a project, it's regulation. And it states that in 2 years, all the systems in Europe need to, no, in 2 years, there will be an implementation guide for this. And in 4 years, all systems in Europe need to use this implementation guide to ensure that the patient has access to these 5 documents in FHIR format: patient summary, e-prescription, medical imaging and report, discharge report, results, and lab reports, and imaging reports. Those are the things that they will be forced to share. And these are the implementation guides. They are already in the works. And fine? Perfect. This is European, so we have been discussing this. Gravitate Health, it's about merging the medicinal product information with the IPS. So you have your pamphlet or leaflet from the medication in electronic format, and you have your IPS document. You merge them, and you have a personalized leaflet. Only the information that you can apply to your own health. That's an example of a medication with some of the specific things for you underlined or highlight. Unicom is about the identification of medication. That's all I know, so I will skip. And Hospitals on FHIR, it's a collaborative project in Europe with all the hospitals that are using FHIR or are intended to use FHIR or are using FHIR for real patients or are using FHIR beyond their hospitals to collaborate, can register themselves voluntarily in a hospital registry, and we know what they are doing, and they are demonstrating every year what they are doing. This is beyond EU regulations because they want to. Spain uses a national terminology server for SNOMED, CT, and FHIR. Belgium creates a lot of core profiles and a lot of other profiles, and they have a very active affiliate. Usually you will see in the federal core patient practitioner organization how the patient looks like in this country, how are practitioners in this country, how are organizations in this country. The same for Austria, core plus other domain-based implementation guides. Portugal, it's defining their core IG plus terminology services in FHIR, plus they are starting to use the EU core lab implementation guide. Switzerland also created their Switzerland core IG and all these domains, lab order reports, IPS, radiology. France has a patient access project called Mon Espace Santé, personal access to the health record, covering vital signs, laboratory, clinical documents, and appointments with the France core IG. And finally, you have already seen Sparked by our friend Kate that demonstrated what they are doing in FHIR, but basically they are creating a AU core requesting labs and radiology with FHIR and defining how to use SNOMED in that context, and also creating reference implementations, testing services, and pilots. And that's my last country. I have more countries somewhere else. I haven't brought everything. So what are the conclusions? So there is a lot of variations on the approaches. Is there any generic trend? And what I can sense is that there should be legally enabled trust and consent. Who can share with who what? There should be registries for patients, providers, and organizations. You need to solve the terminology problem. It's not only defining the co-systems, it's also making them available to users. If you define the best co-system in the world, like SNOMED, but they cannot access it, it's useless. They need to access, and they need to update it, and they need to be able to map to their own local systems. If you don't do that, you don't have anything. So a lot of these projects also include terminology services. Mostly patient access first, and then clinical document repositories. More discussions going on. How to go from your core guide to a specific domain or country guide or regional guide if you have different levels in your geography. How you go from a national guide to a regional guide to a local guide to a project guide. What are the good practices? There are none yet. We are studying that. That's what this group is trying to find out. And you can also see the country level adoption of FHIR in this URL. There's an annual jointly report from HSM International and FHIR on which countries are doing what. And my conclusion is that FHIR is the standard data exchange model to create all our APIs. And what do we need in every project? And this is what they are working on. Provide the directory, patient identity, consent. You need to know if the patient really wants to share or not what. Authorization and authentication, knowing that the actual person trying to access the data can access that specific data, and you have to mix that with consent. You need access to terminology and validation of terminology, constraints and extensions, transport, and audit log and trail. You need to know what happens, who was responsible, and what and when. Then you can build your clinical applications or APIs, public health reports, clinical decision support, document exchange, granular clinical information, referrals, diagnostic orders and reports, pharmacy, the fun part, the part you work on all the time. In the down part, you will see the infrastructure or FHIR structure. In the upper part, you will see the clinical implementation or the clinical fun. And I'm done, apparently.
Thank you again. And we can now take some questions if there are any in the room. If you want to just raise your hand. Just check to see if there's any online. No, we've got no questions online.
I have a question there.
Oh, there we go.
That was fast. Is it on? Now it's on, yes. So what I always find interesting if you compare SNOMED to, for example, the FHIR profiles is that with SNOMED, we try to do everything in the same way, have one connection for a concept. And what you also showed is that every country makes their own FHIR profiles. Shouldn't there be a way to make them also more comparable? Maybe even
well,
the
they
same?
are comparable, but they are not the same. One of the aims we had at some point was, can we only have one? And it's a very US-centric statement, in my opinion. When I get to US persons, they say, can everyone use US core? And I say, no. Yes, it's US core is easy. Yeah, but we don't have your tribes or your race. If I enter race in my country, I go to jail. So it's not the same. We cannot use the same profiles. There should be a way to make more easy to go from a top profile to a more implementable profile in a specific region, maybe, but we haven't yet discovered what the magic is. We are exploring the magic. IPS is the same for everyone, but IPS for me is one workflow. It's sharing my data with others. That's one workflow. We are an API factory. We create APIs, and APIs are for a workflow. You are doing an exchange because you want to do your job. And for each job in each country, there are different rules. It's not a problem of the tool, it's a problem of reality.
Anybody else?
Thank you.